and Nick Saban now coming to the
So
broadcast.
weird.
It is weird just seeing him on the podium and stuff, and he's not, talking as an Alabama coach anymore. Now he's one of the guys. How's it been, just his transition to ESPN?
Dude, the first day I get there and I'm just grabbing coffee, and this is kind of like summer camp where you're seeing a bunch of guys who you hadn't seen in a while, and it's like a big reunion. And I grab some coffee in the morning and I turn around, there's Coach. And like in the past, you see Coach, you get the hell out of the way.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, Peter, how's it going? I'm going, he knew my name.
That's a good impression,
I've been doing it
too.
for a decade now. Because I played college golf, and so I knew he's a big golfer, and we have some mutual friends in the golf industry and stuff. And so every time that he was a coach, I felt like that was my end to Saban, that I would say, hey, I was talking to Justin Thomas about something yesterday, and he goes, and like there was no interest. And then he was like, how's the golf game? I'm like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? So it's great to watch him because you understand his greatness in our production meetings, because we have what they call on television like a rundown of, hey, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and this. And he studies that thing as if it's the play script for a national championship game.
That's how all coaches are.
It's shocking. And I mean, we look at it now, having done it for a while, and it's like, all right, yeah, we're going to do this. Sounds good. And he goes, all right, I know I'm not involved in this segment, but what are they doing here? And why are they doing it? And I'm like, and that's when you start understanding that no matter if it's coaching college football, recruiting, broadcasting, hell, golfing or gardening, if he's committed to something, he understands what it takes to be committed to something. And now it's like, I've never felt so crappy about how I go about doing my job than watching Saban. And everybody freaked out yesterday because we're sitting around, we got this kind of like ESPN green room, and everybody's got their laptops. So I just grabbed some food and I sit down, and somebody's laptop and phone and notes were there. So I just grab it and kind of throw it around, to the corner, and everybody looks at me and they're like, and that's when I realized I had just touched Saban's cell phone and his laptop, and I kind of threw it in there. And then all of a sudden he starts walking around because he was grabbing some more coffee. I hurried up and got my ass over there and put it there. And I said, Coach, I'm sorry. It's crazy.
It's horrible, man.
I was talking to Peter Burns, SEC Network here at SEC Football Media Days. So, yeah, I was going to ask you for your Nick Saban moment. Was that it, or was?
Yeah, I mean, just and there was, you just sit and watch him, and all of these coaches, Sark, Kirby, Lane, we all kind of put them on a pedestal, right? I mean, whether it's right or wrong, but the fans, I mean, they walk around as sometimes more powerful than the governor of a state, because of what they do around the college football programs. And so they're used to just kind of everybody kind of kissing their ass, and talking, hey, Coach, what about this? Oh, that's great. And then watching all of those guys when Saban interviews them, it's so crazy because it's almost like they're trying to answer for like their dad's approval, right? It's almost, like Sark had a great moment yesterday in the podium, as you guys probably saw, where he had a genuine message to Saban. You just felt like, hey, that was a moment of thanks for giving me an opportunity, and he's made the most out of it. And then we had him back on our SEC Network show, and I could not stop watching it because Sark called back in, which never happens. After coaches do media days, they're done. But he called back in because Saban was going to be there, and Saban starts asking him questions. And Sark, it was almost as if Sark wanted to make sure he was answering it the right way. And I found that to be fascinating because there's such an interesting power dynamic with these great big coaches, and Sark is one of those leaders now. But it was still, I mean, it's like E.F. Hutton. When he talks, people, people are going to listen to him, and Saban's the voice of college football now.
Yeah, Saban saved him twice. Saved him by giving him a college football job at Alabama, and then saved him with the heart, the executive physical that discovered the heart issue that Sark had that was a ticking time bomb.
And it's one of those things too, Chip, where I think that all of that chapter has helped build, because I've made mistakes in my life. I talked about how I got fired, and it was those darkest moments that you realize, man, what you have in front of you. And it's really hard to understand that when you're in the moment and when things are going well. And then you tell yourself, man, if I ever get an opportunity, I'm going to be appreciative. And my Sark story is I worked for the Longhorn Network for a couple of weeks when some of the guys were out. So I came up there last year for the Kansas game, and Greg McElroy and the crew were on the call. So Sark has this meeting with McElroy, and I had told Bianco, I was like, hey, I'd like to meet Sark. I'm here for the Kansas game for Longhorn Network. And he's like, yeah, he's like, you're kind of busy, but let me see if we can do it. I was like, I just want to say hi. They finished the meeting. Sark comes out, says hello to me, kind of knew my story, and sat and made eye contact with me for 15 minutes. And we just talked, hey, where are you from? Tell me a little bit about yourself. And normally you ask 1 or 2 questions. You're like, hey, thanks. I appreciate it. And I felt bad how much he wanted to engage and talk on the day before the Kansas game. Remember, Kansas, before Jalen Daniels got banged up and didn't play in that game, they were a legit little threat, competitive game. And I've interviewed Kirby in the middle of March when nothing is going on. You got tumbleweeds, and he doesn't have time for it. And yet Sark, in the game week, who I'm nobody, he sat there and just was genuine. And I was like, that's the mark of a man who's appreciative of every single moment he has in front of him, which is really, really cool.
Peter, this week, SEC Media Days, what has stood out to you from Lane Kiffin's comments to, Shane Beamer talking, his discussion? Obviously, you mentioned all the Texas attention, being in Dallas and stuff. What stood out for you?
It's been a boring week. And I say that, right? Like that, it's not meant to be a punchline, really, because I asked myself that question when we were with our crew as we were kind of wrapping up our show stuff. And I realized what it is I think coaches are so over the name, image, and likeness, the transfer portal, the house settlement, all of these ancillary things about it, to where they're just exhausted. And they're just like, get me through this week. Like, just ask your questions. I'm gonna hit the ball right down the fairway. I'm not going to do anything crazy. And just let's get by this week. And I think that's what it is. I think because normally sometimes these coaches be coming off a vacation. They know what college football schedule is. They know what recruiting looks like, what their team looks like, and they're kind of bored. So they're like, oh, man, let me just kind of stir the hornet's nest a little bit. That was none of it this week. And I think maybe the biggest thing I took away from a player standpoint, a coach standpoint, is 2 things. Eli Drinkwitz normally is kind of this kind of class clown, look at me, and making some kind of fun jokes and stuff like that. He was all business. And I asked him last night after the guys left, I was like, what was that? He's like, I got a good team. And I've seen that happen with coaches. Mark Stoops one year came in and he was pounding the table in our ESPN offices afterwards. And I was like, what's your deal? Like, what's wrong? Nobody's respected my team and nobody asked me any questions. And they, we're looked at as an afterthought in a basketball school, all this stuff. And I was like, that's when I realized behind the scenes, like, Kentucky was going to be really good. And that's the year they broke through. They won 10 games. They finally beat Florida. And so when I see that with Drink, I'm like, oh, he thinks they're going to be good this year. And he doesn't want to do anything to screw it up. And the players thing was Quinn. I mean, that's a dog right there. I was in an interview after him, just happenstance, twice. And so I got to sit in and watch him, how cool, calm, collected he was. And after the spring game, when Arch had the big game, and you're kind of wondering, and I'm seeing all these kids come down and grab Arch's, autograph after throwing 15 touchdowns in the spring game, and Quinn had the 1 interception, the big man touchdown in the spring game, and I'm like, all right, I kind of want to see his body language, right? Like, not how is he cool as collected and could be? And I was like, that's the mark of a man who knows he's QB1. Arch is going to have his time. He ain't worried about anything, and that's the mark of a person that's confident in themselves, and that's what Texas needs right now.
Yeah, it is. And he walked in with the cowboy hat, the boots, the burnt orange tie, and the suit. He had the swag going on.
Belt buckle.
Give me your thoughts on Texas and kind of the whole, SEC Media Days being in Dallas. Some maybe old head SEC reporters saying, not quite sure why we're here, but give me your take on the whole, Texas effect this week.
I think I failed to understand, and I knew it because I lived in Texas for 20 some odd years, and I knew how big the brand of Texas was. I knew that everything that comes around with it. I underestimated how much oxygen the Longhorns suck out of the room this week, because that's what everybody wanted to talk about. I mean, we're coming off of Georgia almost winning 3 straight national championships. We're coming off Kalen DeBoer replacing the greatest coach in the history of the game. And every single interview I did was like, how's Texas going to do? Right? I'm like, and that's impressive. I mean, because this conference does not like that. Now, with that being said, Texas has always had a target on their back because they are Texas. Times that by 5 here, because they don't like that at Georgia. They don't like that at Alabama. You're not going to come into this SEC neighborhood. You heard Saban on the podium talk about it, going, if you think Texas is going to come in here and run it, you got another thing coming. But guess what? He also picked Texas to play in the SEC championship games. And I saw it. I saw it in the spring. If you went to the spring practice, and I saw the spring game, they looked, if you took their jerseys off, the burnt orange off, and you put Ohio State's jerseys on them, or Alabama's jerseys on them, or Georgia's jerseys on them, you're like, that is a national championship looking team. And that's what Sark's built over the last at least 2 seasons out here in Austin.
You said Quinn stood out for you this week. What other SEC quarterback stood out where you're like, okay, this guy, he might have a Heisman-worthy season?
Jackson Dart felt like he was in command, so I was impressed with him and Trey Harris. I mean, him and Ole Miss, they're gonna put up some stupid numbers. And I think Lane wants to have a Heisman Trophy contender, and I think that's the reason why they were able to sell for Jackson to be able to come back one more year. So I thought he was impressive. Talked to Peyton Thorne a little bit at Auburn. They got a much better wide receiver room, and actually I think they could be a sneaky, pretty good team this year. But those are probably the two. Actually, Blake Schaefer, the kid that was at Baylor, who's now going to be with Jeff Lebby. Everybody talks about Lane Kiffin's offense, but Jeff Lebby was really the coordinator that, Lane had kind of taken more of a CEO role. So he's over at Mississippi State. They don't have kind of the Jimmies and Joes yet, but they're going to be a fun team. Like, they're going to be a team you do not want to tussle with, because I think a lot of people are going to be like, oh, it's State. They weren't good last year, and they don't have, they're rebuilding their offensive line. That offense is going to have some fireworks. So, like, I think y'all have them, right?
Yeah, first SEC game of the season.
Buddy, you got what? You'll have Michigan second week, right? You got Colorado State, Michigan, UTSA, and then State.
ULM.
ULM.
And then Mississippi
I'll
State.
be honest with you. I'm glad you guys got ULM before that. No disrespect to them, but, it is what it is. That you're going to get right for that game, because State's not one of those ones. Like, all of a sudden you'll get, hey, how all of a sudden with 14-3? Like, what? Like, they're going to have some offense.
Oh, Jeff Lebby lit them up in Oklahoma last year.
Oh, yeah.
So,
absolutely. The UTSA game is really interesting coming off the Michigan thing, too. Jeff Traylor's a hell of a coach. I don't know how much you guys follow him down in San Antonio. I thought he should have gotten the A&M job. I thought he would have. And now that I know a little bit more Mike Elko, I think he is doing a good job, and I know about him a little bit more now from what I talked to people behind the scenes. But I thought Traylor was one of those guys that, like, you give him the keys to something, there's nobody more Texan than Jeff Traylor.
Yeah.
And they're going to be good. I talked to some people down there that says, listen, there's a chance we can go 11-1 and be a college football playoff team, and that one is going to be Texas. And they love the fact that they're going to get them after Texas goes up to Ann Arbor and hopefully beats the ever-living crap out of them by 100. But they know there's going to be a lot of emotions in that game, and they're laying in the weeds for that one.
Well, we talked about this this week when Texas beat Alabama. They came back home and played Wyoming, and it was 10-10 in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And there was a pick six that helped break it open. But, that is a little danger game there. Okay, so Saban picked Texas and Georgia in the SEC championship game.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the team that people aren't talking enough about? I mean, Alabama.
Alabama's interesting. I think they do take a step back to a certain extent. I mean, you got to realize week 5, which is their 4th game of the season, Georgia goes to Tuscaloosa, and Kirby Smart was 5-1 against Nick Saban. Kirby Smart, every time he tried to beat Alabama with superior teams, kept losing to him. And hell hath no fury like Kirby Smart, who wants some revenge, but he's going to try to put up 1,100,000 points in that game. So I can't wait to watch that one. But for me, Missouri's a really interesting squad. They're not the sexiest name, but their schedule is as advantageous as anybody. Luther Burden, Mookie Cooper is out there. They just got dudes. And Brady Cook really impressed me last year. And again, it's these small things you hear from the coaches. And when Eli Drinkwitz was just kind of real calm and collected, I was like, oh, I think he thinks they're going to be really good. And that's sometimes scary when coaches don't want to talk about their teams, because they're like,
you don't want to jinx nothing.
Yeah, and I don't blame them.
I mean, Ole Miss, we were talking about Lane just a second ago.
Yeah.
10 starters back on offense, 10 starters back on defense.
Everybody.
They got dudes.
I'm surprised they didn't hire you. You didn't come over there. As much as you're a Texas guy, they come to the SIP.
19 of 22 starters are transfers. I mean, this is the year for them, isn't it, Peter?
Yeah, it's pass or fail for Lane, and I think he understands that. And I think the idea of building a program at a place like Ole Miss is difficult because you don't have the same bones as you do maybe at an Ohio State or a Georgia or an Alabama or especially in Austin, right? And so for him, he has to look at windows of when can I take advantage of this window? And that window coincides right now with name, image, and likeness in the transfer portal. And he goes, hey, listen, it's a 12-team playoff. If not now, when? And so I think he's like, we're going to push all the chips in the middle. And the problem is A&M tried to do that a couple of years ago with Jimbo Fisher and kind of the first year of all this stuff. Just because you have transfer portal, I would call them mercenaries to a certain extent, doesn't mean you can handle that type. Jimbo was built to have a lot of success in the old school version of college football. He wanted to play in this new transfer portal in recruiting world. He wanted to beat Nick in those recruiting rankings, and he did, okay? But I don't think he was ready to coach the mentality of these players that are just like, hey, bro, I don't care about your school. I don't care about the money that I'm getting. I care about playing really well. And I think Lane understands and speaks these kids' language. Be like, listen, man, like, I love Ole Miss. I want you to love Ole Miss for the next year, and you give it everything because guess what? That's how you're going to get to the NFL. We're also going to, have an opportunity to make some NIL money, and it's a win-win for everybody. And I think that's the new version. And I think Sark walks a very almost like a perfect line in between both of them of old school Saban mentality, but new school having the Lamborghinis parked outside of the football facility. Be like, it is what it is.
I'm fascinated by the Sarkisian Lane Kiffin dynamic because they lead parallel lives, right? They're both at USC with Pete Carroll. They were both with the Raiders for a minute. Lane is the head coach, and then they both go to Alabama, and when Lane leaves there, he has to go to Florida Atlantic to start his head coaching.
Almost
career.
went to LSU.
Almost went to LSU. In fact, I remember being in a room and seeing phone calls being made and be like, oh, because I'm an LSU Tiger. I'm like, Lane running in this offense, and him and Ogeron had a relationship. But I think ultimately it came down to his agent Jimmy Sexton, those guys going, hey, we know you could be a coordinator somewhere. That's not the issue. What we need you to do is we need you to show how you could be a CEO of a head coach again. And so he had success at FAU, and then that ultimately led to even bigger opportunity. Yeah, and now here they are in the same conference. Texas isn't scheduled to play Ole Miss, but it would be something if they ended up playing in the playoff.
There's not a bad storyline. I mean, again, think about College Station and Kyle Field that last game. If Texas is sitting there at 11 and 11-0, or even 10-1. And all of a sudden you've got a 9-2 A&M, which I think is feasible. You've got a college football playoff berth on the line in that game, in that game that hadn't been played. Well, holy hell, I got goosebumps thinking about it. I don't even know what the ticket broker's going to charge for that game.
It's going to be a grip.
Buddy, there is some hatred right now between A&M and Texas. I was just there in Austin for the Welcome to the SEC show. And, the whole Sloss thing added a little kerosene to the fire and stuff like that. But I'll be honest with you, I love it. I love every part of it because, sports at the end of the day is entertainment. There's a lot of life or death things in our life that we got to deal with. I'm like, entertain me. And I don't have a dog in the fight. I like Texas. I like people at A&M and stuff like that. I was just like, oh, how is this going to play out? Like that. Those are the storylines I absolutely love.
Well, that game between A&M and Notre Dame at Kyle Field on August 31st at 6:30 at night could change the complexion of how we think of A&M.
Yeah,
if they pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, you got A&M, Notre Dame to start off. That's going to be an interesting season. So the bookend games for the Aggies this year are fascinating to me because you got Mike L going up against a team he knows in Notre Dame who are supposed to be pretty good. And then the flip side on the back end of it, you get the Texas part of it. So, again, Missouri and Oklahoma being able to play again, Texas and Arkansas. I mean, like the juice this year traditionally – if we didn't have Texas and Oklahoma, would be all about a 12-team playoff and Bama and Saban leaving. The juice was with the Longhorns. Now it's what they're going to do with it. and everybody expects them to hit the ground running as well.
Last thing, talking to Peter Burns, SEC Network, do you think we end up with a 9-game conference schedule in 26?
I think that if we go, I don't know if we go to 9. I think if we go to 10, believe it or not. Like I don't know that from inside information, but if you're going to say the 8-game, obviously they're business partners with my employer, with SEC, with ESPN, and I would imagine they're going to go, all right, I can get a little bit more money for one more game, but why don't we look at the contract and why not 2 more games? Why not have a Michigan on the schedule and a UTSA on the schedule? And go, hey, you know what? We're going to add 2 more conference games for everybody. We're gonna have even better setups. And by the way, our television deal is going to be even worth more now than the Big Ten. And I had an athletic director about a month and a half ago, and I said, well, where were you at in 10 years from now? And he goes, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. He wasn't saying this was happening, but he goes, we may not have non-conference games in 10 years from now. Wow. Why are you subsidizing Chattanooga football? Why are you subsidizing UL Monroe? And it stinks because I went to school at UTSA. Those are big paycheck games. That's how many players and how many athletic departments are built on University of Texas and come up here, get your whooping, I'm going to give you $2 million. Right. And I don't want that to happen. But as I see, everybody, while the getting was good for everybody, hey, we're fine playing these games and stuff like that. And sooner or later, it's going to be like, man, the cream's going to rise to the top. And if you're not one of the big dogs, you got to get out. I mean, look what happened to Pac-12.
Yeah.
And that was a major conference with an unbelievable amount of history. Sooner or later.
Had a really good year last year as a conference.
And the thing is, too, and everybody will say, oh, it was Texas and Oklahoma moving to the SEC. Wow. And people go, well, what about – I can't believe Greg Sankey did that. He ruined college football. I go, well, put yourself in Sankey's shoes. You are tasked with being the steward of this conference. In Texas and Oklahoma, 2 of the biggest brands in all of college athletics, not just football, say, hey, we don't like our deal. We're leaving. We need a new place to stay. You're going to say no and then let them go? I mean, hell, remember the Pac team.
Right.
Nobody knows it better than you about how close that thing was coming. And you're going to let them all of a sudden, the Big Ten, who's hungry and upset that the SEC has had so much success, you let them make that phone call? Nope. You just be like, all right, I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's the thirst or hunger or want for Commissioner Sankey to be the person that says, all right, I'm going to take now Clemson and Florida State, North Carolina, and all this stuff because the Big Ten did it. Sankey ain't going to react to anybody.
Right.
He'll stand pat, and you'll have the other conferences do their things. That's why the Big Ten decided to add everybody and their mother out there, and everybody else panicked is because of the leadership of this conference.
Yeah. Peter Burns, SEC Network.